You pointed out that some countries, like France, don't want a peace conference to succeed. Why is that?
Actually, you have two points, or two reasons, let's say. First one, not related only to the French. It's related to every official who was complicit and involved in the propaganda and the aggression against Syria during the last 4 years. It's about the end of this war will unmask those officials in front of their public opinions. In a country where there's public opinion, I don't mean Saudi Arabia and Qatar, where there's no public opinion anyway, but generally they will be unmasked about the question, whether the revolution that you mentioned, that you talked about, how could a revolution collapse or fail if you have the support of the West, the support of regional country, all this money and armament and so on, and he will support that he's the dictator who's killing his good people. So the people are against him, the regional country against him, and the West is against him, and he succeeded. It's one of two options. You're either lying to us, or you are talking about Superman, because you don't have Superman. He's a regular president. It means he could withstand 4 years only because he had the public support. Doesn't mean full public support or 100% or absolute public support, but definitely has support from large amount of the Syrian people. So this is a lie that the public opinion in the West and in other countries will ask the official about. What about the Arab Spring that turned out to be, instead of budding flowers, blood and killing and destruction? Is that the spring that you talked about? This is one reason. The other reason is more specific toward France, but not limited, but more specific, let's say. It's about the financial relation between France and the Gulf states. Maybe because they have financial difficulties, I don't know why, but this financial relation, and I don't have any proof whether this is about the vested interest about some officials in France or it's about public interest. I don't have any proof, but at the end, these interests, financial interests, push those officials in France to exchange their values of liberty and fraternity and democracy, all the things that they used to preach. They exchange those values for petrodollars. So now, those French officials and some others in the West, they don't practice what they preach anymore.
But the tide seems to change a little bit. You had the French MPs here. It was an organized visit, or it came as a surprise to you?
No, it wasn't a surprise, because it wasn't the first delegation to come to Syria.
By different French delegation?
French and other countries, different kind of delegations, activists, mediators. Some officials came to deal with us under the table, not publicly.
But this one was organized with your government?
Yeah, it was official organized, and they had a schedule, and they came. It was prepared weeks before the visit. It wasn't a surprise.
With a diplomatic French diplomat, or as well, or not?
We had the impression, and it's a strong impression, that most of the government, the main officials in the government, they know about it in advance, and they didn't oppose.
So, did they send you any message?
No, there wasn't a message, and they came to see the reality on the ground. And I think that's a reflection, not of this delegation. The delegation that came to Syria recently from different countries, especially in the West, is a reflection of don't taken in with the narrative, an insidious narrative about Syria and in the West by the official. They want to know the truth about what, I mean, it's a kind of suspicions about the whole propaganda in the West.
So in a sense, the tide is changing, because probably there are some people thinking that even though it's a bad solution, it's better to deal with Bachar Al Assad than to deal with the worst solution, which is going to be the Islamic State.
I don't think the general public think about the second part. It's about the first part, about what's happening and how everything we said in Syria at the beginning of the crisis used to say later. They said it's peaceful, you say it's not peaceful. They've been killing those demonstrators that called them peaceful demonstrators, has killed policemen. Then it became militant. They said, yes, it's militant. We said it's not militant, it's terrorism. They say, no, it's not terrorism. Then when they say it's terrorism, we say it's Al-Qaïda. They say, no, it's not. So whatever we say, they said later. That creates a lot of suspicion in the way they want to come to understand this part. Why you are saying whatever Syria was saying at the beginning. Of course, in the West, the propagandists, whether officials or media, they added something to the real story, that Daesh And Al-Nusra was created by Assad, or it's because of his policy and so on.
But you've read a lot of jihadists from the prisons that went to Daesh, to the Islamic State.
No, that's before the crisis. They were sentenced for a few years, and when they end the sentence, they left the prison. We didn't. We never. It's a law. You have institution. You have judiciary system in Syria.
Anyway, Europe is facing more and more threats of terrorism linked to the jihadist movements. Some of them with connections here in Syria. I mean, the Al-Qaïda or the Islamic State. And the question here is that: is Syria able to help the European countries fighting these threats of terrorism?
This is like a building. You cannot build a building without having the foundation. So what the foundation that we need in this case? First, you need the officials in Europe to have the will to fight terrorism. This is something we don't find till this moment. Second, they need to have a prudent policies. You cannot have with arrogant, stubborn official that only adopted egotistical policies. Third, which is very important, fighting terrorism should be a value, should become a value. It cannot be a sort of opportunism. Like if now, because you are suffering in Europe from terrorism, you're scared, you want to fight terrorism in this region. What about a few years ago? You didn't suffer.
But can you help the
Yeah, exactly. If they don't help themselves first, we cannot. If they help themselves, we are ready to help. If you build this foundation, if you have this foundation, you can go to the building. This is where you can talk about how to integrate the community in your country, how to have exchange of information with the intelligence. You have many ways. Of course we can, but you need to have the foundation in order to succeed.
Mr. President, let me quote: the Syrian people aspire more freedom, justice, human rights. They aspire to more plurality and democracy. Your foreign minister said this in the Geneva conference. Yeah. However, the state of Syria is perceived differently in the West. Till now, it's perceived as brutal, ruthless, dictatorial, and it's not just a question of image. So how is it possible to convince the people that...
Yeah, this is illogical and unrealistic, because how can somebody who kill his people and oppress his people would be supported by the same people? How? Tell me about this contradiction. Look at it from the outside. Is it palatable? Can you understand? It doesn't.
But Mr. President, the reality is that if you allow me to go backwards and to try to
pick up before the crisis.
Let me just try to. You started 4 years ago with the peaceful demonstrators that were repressed. And then you are blamed, your government is blamed for a lot of allegations of human rights violations in your own ranks, repression. You have the Caesar report, a defector from the army, with photos of massacres, of torture of the opposition. You have allegations that you have used chemical weapons. You have allegations of using the barrel bombs till now. And so the human rights reports about Syria, they are not very good for you, your government, and the Syrian army.
Yeah. So you are talking about massive propaganda for 4 years. We cannot answer everyone in one interview, but I would say the demonstrations never were peaceful, because the first week we lost many of our policemen. How? How could the peaceful demonstration kill a policeman? It wasn't peaceful. So this is beginning of the lies. This is the beginning of the propaganda.
All lies all the time? 4 years of lies, Mr. President?
Exactly. That's what happened. Because how do you have ISIS? Suddenly? You don't have ISIS suddenly. You don't have armament suddenly. You don't have Al-Nusra front suddenly. It's a long process. You cannot have it just in a few weeks. Suddenly everybody is talking about ISIS. We go back to our statements from the very beginning, and you can see that the evolution of the events was going in that regard from the very beginning, and we said that. But they didn't want to listen. They wanted to listen to their statements. That's why I say it's impossible to only tell lies in the West. How can you tell the truth if you don't have any embassy in this country? How can you tell the truth if you listen to Qatar and Al Jazeera that were paying the money to those terrorists?
So You blame Turkey, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia for being the backbone of the jihadists.
Yeah.
You have the proofs.
Very simple. What the ideology of ISIS? What the ideology? You know what is it? It's Wahhabi ideology. Do we have it in Syria? Do we have it in Morocco or in the Western Arab world? Actually, it's existed in Saudi Arabia.
As in Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia and Qatar. This is the Wahhabi ideology. Second, Erdogan is Muslim Brotherhood. He's very staunch advocate of Muslim Brotherhood ideology, which was the first organization in the history of Islam at the beginning of the last century who promoted the violence in implementing political agenda. So you have those, and you have that's enough proof. Going back to the Western media, in the Western media, in the American media in particular, they say 80% of the terrorists coming from Turkey. You have another realistic one. What you called it in your media, Kobani, which is called Ain al-Arab. It took 4 months to be liberated, in spite of the attack of the alliance. Why? Actually, similar city, the same size and the same terrain, it took with the Syrian army 2 to 3 weeks. Why? Because it was supported logistically through Turkey. It's on the border. They send them everything, armament, all kind of support. The recent event when Turkey...
But did you support the Kurds? Did the Syrian army support the Kurds? Because they are also fighting the Syrian army,
Before the issue of Kobani, before that, we did. Before Kobani, we supported the Kurds because it didn't start there. It started before. And before the alliance started supporting the Kurds, we did. We sent them armament. Of course, they're going to say no, because the Americans said, say no, and we will help you. If they say yes, the Americans will be angry. Just to take precaution about any statement they may say now that we didn't. We have all the documents about the armament that's been sent to them, beside the air raids and so on, and the bombardments and everything else.
New Syrian troops are being trained in the framework of Free Syrian Army to fight against the Islamic State. You think you will have to fight them as well?
You know, and I know, and everybody knows that those 5,000 were announced by the Americans. And this is my proof that the Western officials don't have will to fight terrorism. That's the proof. I told you the basement, the foundation is to have the will. It means they don't have the will. If Obama said the moderate oppositions is fantasy, so who do you send the money and the armament to? Reality. You don't send it to the fantasy, you send it to the reality. And the reality are the extremists. And those 5,000 are going to be another support to those terrorists, because the same grassroots of the organization that's been supported by the West, by money and armaments, they joined ISIS with their armaments and with themselves.
2 questions to finish this interview. This is your first interview with a journalist from a Portuguese-speaking country. Do you expect anything from these countries?
I don't expect, I hope. I hope the first thing, which is very simple, just for the officials to tell their people the truth, the unbiased truth, without any preconception. Just tell your people the truth and they can be able to analyze. Second, we hope from Portugal as part of the European EU to look at the Czech Republic, small country, 10 millions, but it was very wise in dealing with the crisis in Syria. They have their embassy, they can tell what's going on the ground, because isolationism is not a policy. When you isolate yourself, when you try to isolate a country by removing your ambassadors or closing your embassies, you isolate yourself from the reality. You shouldn't isolate yourself as Europe from reality. We hope Portugal can play that role in the EU to shift this trend that started with the Americans' administration of Bush. When they have problem with somebody or with some area, instead of being more involved, they cut their relation with it. This is not policy.
Just one last question, Mr. President. You're a key player for any possible peace deal. Don't you feel sometimes doubts, anguish with this tremendous responsibility? Don't you feel what history might say about you?
Yeah, of course. This is the most important thing that any politician or leader should think about. And it's about, first of all, about having goodwill and good intention to help your country. People will judge you by your will, by how much you are related to your country, related to your people, how much you are patriot, not puppet or marionette that's been moved from the outside. This is the most important thing. How much you do, what the best you can do to protect your country and to protect your people.
Thank you, Mr. President, for this interview. Thank you for being with RTP.
Thank you for you.